So for this session, we will be speaking about they will be speaking about their Filipino-Chinese ancestry and how this features in their works. The quality of it, the degree of integration into Filipino life, and how that dramatically changed because of the context of the West Philippine Sea. For our first speaker, we have Yvette Tan. She's the Philippines' most celebrated horror writer. Doesn't show, huh? Aside from short fiction collections in English and Tagalog, she's written a feature film that received nationwide release and has co-written a libretto for the ballet performed by Ballet Philippines. She was the official scribe of the Manila Biennale in 2018, and her story was the companion piece to the artwork that adorned the Philippine Pavilion in 2021 Frankfurt Book Fair. She was a creative consultant for the Filipino game inspired by the country's mythical creatures and the collection Seek, Yehor, and Other Stories, which was nominated for the 41st National Book Awards. Her works have been translated into Spanish, Czech, Hungarian, and French. Our second speaker is Charlson Ong, who I've known for 30 years, I think. And he has published 4 collections of short fiction: Men of the East and Other Stories, Woman of Amkau and Other Stories, Conversion and Other Fictions, and Of That Other Country We Now Speak. He also has 5 novels: An Embarrassment of Riches, Banyaga, A Song of War, Blue Angel, White Shadow, and White Lady, Black Christ, and Our Hat Sun. His short fiction has been compiled in Sojourner, Settler, Seer by Mil Flores in 2024. He has won the Carlos Palanca Memorial Award for Short Story in English, the Philippine National Book Award for Short Fiction and the Novel. He is a board member of the Philippine chapter of International Pen. Ladies and gentlemen, I hand over the floor to Yvette. Please give them a hand.
Hello, everyone. Good morning, everyone. Thank you for being here. When they first asked me to be part of this panel, I said, "Are you sure?" Because all I'm going to do is complain about being Chinese in the Philippines. Um, my experience growing up as a Filipino of Chinese descent has not exactly been the best because number one, I'm a woman. Number two, I'm disabled. Number three, I don't come from a rich family. And now that I'm older, number four, I write horror. None of these things are good things to be in in the Filipino Chinese community. Also, I'm not a business person. That's five. I'm not a business person. I work in the arts. Um, a lot of my support actually has come from the Filipino community. They're the ones who embraced my work. They liked that I write about Filipino folklore. Um, it's only now like the Chinese community will sometimes acknowledge, depending on who you're talking to, will sometimes acknowledge that I'm doing a good thing, that I'm making them proud. But um, I didn't have very, very much support. And I can still say that until now. Coming here to Frankfurt, when I made the announcement to Frankfurt, for example, in a group of a Chinese group chat group that I'm part of. Do you know how many people congratulated me for being part of the Philippine representation here to Frankfurt? Coming here, nobody in that group congratulated me. I posted, "Oh, I have a forum. I'm going to be here with Charlson. We're representing the Philippines." The response I got was, "Oh, you should meet so and so." No congratulations whatsoever from the community. Coming here, only 2 people congratulated me that I was part of the Philippine delegation, and one of them wasn't even ethnically Chinese. She just studied in a Chinese school. So That's the level of um, acceptance I have in the Chinese community. But that hasn't stopped me from trying to embrace my roots. I write horror, and it's folk horror specifically. I write about the Filipino experience. I write about what it's like to be supernaturally inclined in the Philippines, and that's what people know me for. I've also used this as a way to figure out what it means to be Chinese in the Philippines, especially as somebody who isn't exactly accepted, or actually begrudgingly accepted by her community. Um, I have written exactly one story about it, which is called Fold Up Boy, and it takes place during the Spanish occupation of the Philippines. Now, I was told that the reason why there are only a few generations of Chinese in the Philippines. Like, I'm third generation, so which means there are probably only four generations max in the Philippines, despite the Philippines and the Chinese trading even before we were colonized, is because when we were during the Spanish era, when we were still under the colony of Spain, when we were a colony of Spain, the Spanish would routinely massacre Chinese outposts, like the Chinese communities outside Intramuros, to cleanse them. There were massacres all the time, and that's where my story takes place. So my story is a combination of somebody who like me, grew up in Manila, grew up in a Catholic school, doesn't know anything about her Chinese roots, very doesn't know anything about the traditional Chinese ways, but somehow finds the ghost of this Chinese boy who was massacred by the Spanish at that time. So I would like to read you an excerpt of how she finds a way to send him to where he's supposed to go, using both what she knows and trying to find out what circumstances he was in, using his traditions and the traditions she grew up with, so that she herself can find out what it means to be Filipino of Chinese descent. So the story is called Fold Up Boy, and it's from my second collection in English called Siki Hor, which is, by the way, a pun on the province of the Philippines, Sikihor, which is known for its witchcraft and yes, potion making and all that. That's a completely different thing. Okay, so this is called Fold Up Boy. She could see him following her around, a shadow that darted in and out of her vision. It was comforting to know he was there, and strange to think that only a few days before she had been telling him to leave her alone. I wonder what kind of boyfriend he'd make. She laughed at the thought. He was old enough to be her great grandfather's grandfather. He appeared again during Chinese class. Fortunately, Lao Shi was in a teaching mood and was discussing a story about a dog that had spent all his life at the train station waiting for his master to come home. Ate, the boy, the ghost, the name of the boy, ghost, waved at her. She smiled at him. Lao Shi gave her an odd look, her eyes momentarily flicking towards Jen's smile. Jen raised her hand. Lao Bing Bing, Lao Shi said, addressing Jen by her Chinese name as she did all her students. I didn't know how to ask this in Mandarin, Jen said in broken Hokkien, but can you tell us how the Chinese used to live in the Spanish times? Lao Shi blinked, then said, I'm glad you're taking an interest in our heritage, she said. I'll read it up on it and we can discuss that tomorrow. Off to the side, Jen could see Ate smile. He was practically jumping up and down by the time they met up after school. Volleyball practice had gone well, with the girls heading off for pizza after school. Jen had elected to stay behind, telling them that she was sitting this one out but would join them for the mall sale the next day. She had changed, making sure that she was alone before sneaking back to her locker where Ade was already waiting. What took you so long? He asked, then did a double take. What are you wearing? Jen laughed. Patience, she joked, repeating something her dad would say to her when she was younger and much more impatient. She was in a white shirt, white pants, and white sneakers. Morning clothes. She took out a large plastic bag. I googled this, but I'm not quite sure if I got the sentence right. She took out a couple of candles, lit them, set them on the floor in front of her open locker. Then she took some incense sticks, secured their bottoms with lumps of clay, lit them with the candle flames, and set them down as well. I hope it's the thought that counts. Next came flowers, orange santans and red gumamelas picked from the school garden. She took out a magazine cutout. She took out magazine cutouts of a house, a car, some money, in dollars, hoping the afterlife had a good exchange rate, and a dog. You've got to have stuff for the afterlife, she said. This is Britney Spears' mansion. I heard it cost 70 million. This is Paris Hilton's Bentley, the one she didn't crash. I know you can't drive, but I figure you'll be able to learn wherever you're going. She held up the cash. I don't know how to make hell notes. I hope I hope they accept fake dollars. She was crying now, tears spilling down her cheeks as she chattered, laughing, trying to make light of what she was doing. She put them all in a big can, lit a match, and dropped it in, watching as the flames licked at the paper. What are you doing? Ate asked, even though he already knew. It's the only way for you to find your family, Jen said. They died together, you went alone. You need somebody who cares for you to send you on your way. Someone who cares for me, Ate repeated. Jen nodded. She took out cutouts of a man, a woman, and a little girl, and a dog. I don't know what your family looked like, she said. Maybe you can imagine that this is them. She smiled, holding back tears. I even got you a dog. I hope you like Jack Russells. They're all the rage. She took out a Bible, pages crumpled from use and religion class, opened it to a page she had marked with a post-it. I don't know what religion you were, she said, but this might comfort you. I'm not very religious myself, but she began to read from the 23rd Psalm. Though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, I will fear no evil, for thou art with me. She began to cry, and through her tears she could see Ate growing faint. He was smiling at her, saying something that she couldn't quite make out. She leaned towards him, trying to listen to what he was saying. The light, he whispered, it's beautiful. She continued reading. Thy rod and thy staff, they comfort me. Thou preparest a table before me in the presence of mine enemies. The fire was dying down as the papers turned to ash. Ate had disappeared now, but Jen could still smell him. Earth and blood. Death and decay, the sickly odor that she had come to think of as his scent, his perfume. Goodbye, my fold-up boy, she whispered, and good luck. Thank you, Jen, Ate, his voice whispered from far away, followed by a surprise. Mama, Papa. Jen could hear footsteps echoing against the corridor, getting softer with each step. Until they disappeared, the candles died, the scent was gone. Jen pulled her knees to her chest and cried. So that's an excerpt from. Thank you. So that's an excerpt from Fold Out Boy. And like Jen, I too continue my journey discovering what it means to be Chinese, somebody of Chinese descent in the Philippines. And thankfully now, to add to this narrative, I've met other people who share where I come from. They might not have the same circumstances, but for some reason or another, they feel like outcasts. Maybe they believe in weird things, different things, don't quite fit in. And I'm glad they've come. I'm glad that my stories have resonated with them and my existence has resonated with them as somebody who doesn't quite fit into the Filipino-Chinese mold, but continues to soldier on despite that. So, yes, thank you very much. Yes.
Hello. Yeah, glad to be here. Well, the Chinese have been around. Actually, we've been talking of the diaspora here, based in the Philippine diaspora. Before that diaspora, of course, there was the other diaspora, several hundred, maybe the last 500 to 1,000 years across Southeast Asia, and that was the diaspora of the Southern Chinese to Southeast Asia, and they're all over Southeast Asia and have a big influence or even controls, I would say, of the economy, Southeast Asia. and that has led to a lot of tension. The Chinese have sometimes been called the Jews of Southeast Asia, because they have an inordinate influence over the economy. Sometimes not by circumstance, because they were forced to be money lenders, forced to be financiers. So that's been the Philippines. We are maybe 1 to 2% of the population, although there's a large mestizo class, all the time. But those who identify, who are ethnically or still culturally identify as Chinese have always been a very small percentage, with an admittedly inordinate control over the economy. So basically, we don't have the numbers, right? We don't have the numbers. We cannot threaten the establishment. So basically, we pay them off. It's always been the case. We pay them off, right? One way or the other. So now you have the malls that are mostly Chinese owned. And some years ago, you had a lot of kidnapping, of the Chinese. So when the economy is bad, then Chinese people have to hire security. And there's always that. So it's been that sort of relationship. Now you pay them off, and you keep you keep your nose clean. You don't get involved in, you don't attract attention. That's been the traditional way. But recently, it's starting to change. A lot of the third, fourth generation are into politics, and they're attracting attention. But in the past, the elders would really frown on that. Just you stay away. Don't show don't attract attention. So when I was growing up, there was I'm third generation. My grandparents were immigrants. There was almost no representation of the Chinese in literature or in mass media. Well, Rizal had Quiroga in the El Filibusterismo, who was this opportunistic Chinese who had all the Spanish officials in his pocket. So Simon dealt with him, because Simon wanted to foment revolution, and he had to deal with this guy. If you read the Philly, Quiroga is actually the person who has the clearest idea of what's going on, what will happen, And so and Simon knew that. Of course, Rizal was also a mestizo, although he identified as Indio. And so there was Quiroga. I think the first representation of the Chinese in literature. Also, the word lanlang. The Chinese come from a small area, actually, in Xiamen area, South China. So we call ourselves lanlang, our people, and we speak lanlang way, our language. It's like the Jews and the Gentiles. Everyone else is, if you are not lanlang, you are Wana, you are Gentile. Okay. Yeah. So across Southeast Asia, that's the case. Although in other parts, in Indonesia, Malaysia, there's more conflict among the Chinese groups, because they came as labor and all that. They came as labor to the mines. The British bought them as laborers and all that. So in the Philippines, mostly a trading class. So when I was growing up, there was no representation. There was this guy on TV who was actually a Filipino who looked very Chinese. He was called Akong because he would dress up in a Qing Dynasty outfit and speak gibberish. He couldn't speak Chinese, but he was mimicking the accent and all that. And it was a caricature. And so whenever my grandmother, but no, I was amused by him. So if it was on TV, I would watch it. I was laughing. But then when my grandmother walked in, we would switch the channels because she didn't like it. Of course, later I realized why. Because she was the one being caricatured. I didn't feel like I was being caricatured. I was laughing with the. So this guy, there was that caricature. The only thing there was, he was not an evil person. He was a friendly neighborhood. He owned a neighborhood store. But during the elections in 1969, I remember when Marcos first ran for office, uh, they used him, black propaganda, you know, because they marked the TV station then was owned by the ally of Marcos, no? Lopez, who was running for vice president. So every 6 o'clock, there was this guy, Akong would come out, and he was collaborating with. They also caricatured his. The opponent of Marcos then was Osmeña, was Chinese origin. They called him Ken Koi because of his. He had a jaw, and then he was played by this comic character, and then they would be collaborating, to do some to inflate prices and all that, So then I remember that even today it wouldn't be allowed on these days, but back then anything goes. So it was really black propaganda that this guy Akong, the Chinese, were collaborating, with Osmeña, insinuating that he was Kenkoy and he had a Chinese background. So I remember to this day. And then so those were the images I grew up with. And then 1975, there was a movie by our national artist Lina Broca, who has since passed. He made a movie version of a novel called Sa Kuko ng Liwanag, in the claws of light. And first time there was a Chinese, because the story is that this lass from the province, Ligaya Paraiso, literally bliss of paradise, was recruited, lured to Manila by a recruiter, and ends up in Chinatown, becomes the captain one of a Chinese person, played by a actual Chinese person. You didn't see this movie? No. So, and that was so. And then her boyfriend comes to Manila, looking for her, and finds her, and then they get together, and so I think the Chinese finds out and kills her, and then she dies. And then so the boyfriend blames the Chinese, Atek, I remember his name, for the murder, and then he gets a nice pick, goes up to his. He lives in Chinatown, this small room, Entresuello, and kills the Chinese and murders him really slaughters him like a dog, you know. So that really stuck with me. I was shocked by and so that created quite a an event. No? And then so after that, I think I was talking to Robbie Laurel. His family got together and produced a movie called Dragon something with Erap, to counter that movie. So anyway, that was those were the two things that I remember. So I thought, if you have Quiroga, and then you have Atek, and then you have so those are the only representations you had. So there must be more, right? After all, there was a Chinese general in Aguinaldo's army, So when I started to write, I thought this is, there are more stories to tell. So I made a decision back then that I would write about the Chinese in the that is, much of the cities, the towns in the Philippines were made by Chinese commerce, and yet they've always been in the periphery. So I started writing then, and yun. So my first novel, which had a prize in the Philippine Centennial competition, was celebrated the centennial. It's set, by the way, in a fictional island called the Victorianas, and this was the 20 years ago. I wrote it, and at the time, it wasn't yet a big issue, but here you have some Chinese military occupying islands, and producing using prison labor, from China. Anyway, so I started writing it, and then eventually, can you move the uh so those were the representation I had. So I thought I had to do it. Uh, but then around 20 years ago, of course, the Chinese got into movie production, and he had Mother Lily, who was the big producer. Eventually, she started making movies about her family. So it's called Manopo. And then through the last 20 years, a lot of it became a franchise. So now I think in popular media, it's no longer strange to see Chinese. So it's changed. It's changed. It's no longer an exotic thing. In fact, you have Filipino actors speaking Hokkien, which is really a big turnaround from when I was a boy. But now, since the 1980s, there's a new phenomenon that's happening because China in 1949, with the communist victory, China basically was closed down. Right? There was no more. Before that, the migration was just constant. So the people from China came. They were always under the suasion of the community. You had to behave, keep in line. They were part of the relatives, but that all stopped for 40 years because China was basically closed. A lot of the political affiliation shifted to Taiwan, where the Kuomintang went, and it's basically Philippines is before it was basically a Kuomintang community. And then they started coming back in the 80s, 1980s. Slowly, they were selling trinkets, blah blah blah. Again, working, but China moved so fast. So now they're everywhere. It's no longer the labor. It's part of the capital. And then there are investors coming in. There are students. There are drug lords. They operate the Philippine gaming online operations for the China market. So they had to bring in an army of Mandarin speaking. So that's created tension. There's a new dynamic now, and it's because of the new immigrants. There's a very complicated relationship between the new migrants and the community. The community tended to sneer, to look down on them. We thought of them as uncouth, provincial, money grubbing, but now they are driving around in Jaguars and all that. So, and then of course, now we're caught up in the geopolitics of America and China. So all these things are coming to the fore again. It's becoming tense again. A different age, different issue. So anyway, my when I compiled my stories, I called it sojourner, settler, seer. Because the Chinese first came as sojourners. They settled during the Spanish period because of the galleon trade. So they settled, and then eventually, I think in time you become when you're a seer. You have a vision for the past and the future. So I also have a story, a massacre story, that was based on the 1776 massacre of the Chinese. It's called A Season of 10,000 Noses. Just to tell you briefly about it. In the past, the saints, the santos, the saints that are in the churches, the first thing that fall off is the nose. The nose falls off. So I read something about it. So there, and then it was replaced. They replaced the noses. There was a Chinese artisan who replaced the nose. So there's a rumor back in his hometown in Xiamen that the Filipino, people in the Manila are crazy for noses. No, so the village, they start making noses. No? They get rid of they stop doing everything else and just cut down their trees and build noses to send to Manila. But of course, the captain of the ship knew better, no, but he couldn't help it because it spread the rumor. So he had this ship full of noses that he had to bring to Manila. And then when the ship was coming, there was a rumor that there's a ship coming with noses. And so the Spanish, the governor general panics. He thinks, no, this is a code. There's going to be the uprising. So when the ship arrives, it leads to the attack, and then they burn the. It's actually a sort of why a young adult story also about so they burn and then the boy is rescued by the father of his friend, who he was going to be lynched, so he was saved, but he cuts off his pigtail. Okay, so it's called the season of 10,000 noses. But I'll read an excerpt from something else. It's, it's all in here. So I'll read from a story called "Of That Other Country We Now Speak." This was in 1999, and it's of that other country we now speak. A land of yellow earth and blue sky, where a golden emperor once ruled. My grandmother lived in that land. In the mornings, she bathed in a river, where a green dragon once played, where a sad poet drowned, reaching for the moon one night. But my grandmother had stolen the moon. She had scooped the moon into her wooden bowl and hidden it inside an earthen jar, where it remains to this day. It is the curse of the poor poet that has plagued our family ever since, that has followed us across many rivers and oceans. My grandmother left the moon back in the old country. For 10 years, the moon rested inside her earthen jar and grew heavy. For 10 years, the night sky over her village remained moonless. When the time came for her to give the moon back to the river, so that the moon's shadow could once more be seen over the sky, the soldiers arrived. She said they were looking for the green dragon that played in the old river. For it is said, the one who rides the green dragon shall rule over the land of 10,000 sorrows. But the absence of moonlight saddened the soldiers that night. They could not remember the faces of their mothers, wives, and children. Their sadness turned to anger. Their sadness turned to anger, and they drove the villagers out of their homes. Before she fled, my grandmother took her jar to the family crypt and buried it beside her grandmother. She promised to return for it, but her family placed her on a boat which sailed farther away. That is the tale she told me as a child. That is the story I remember.
Thank you very much for your sharing. Is there anyone in the audience who would like to ask a question or make a comment? Yes, please. Candy.
Yeah, that you keep talking about being an outsider in the Chinese community. Can you, and if it's too not too personal, can you explain a little bit more?
Um, well, hello. Okay. It's how do I explain it? It's well, as I mentioned, by virtue of my being a woman, by virtue of my being disabled. These are all very superficial things. I'm not white. I'm not fair skinned. For Chinese, I'm not fair skinned. For Filipino, I am, but for Chinese, I'm not. I'm not skinny. I'm not like I'm not even pure blood. Like I have Filipino blood in me. So all these things have in one way or the other put me outside the community. And now that I write horror, um that's an added thing because in the Chinese in the Chinoy community, the Chinoys are what we call the Chinese Filipinos. They're very very scared of talking about horror and the supernatural. So it's taboo to them because they think that if you talk about it, it might happen to you. There's still that belief. And but also if you ask them if they have a story about it, they'll tell you so many stories. They'll say, I don't believe, but then they'll tell you a story that borders on the supernatural. So they because I write horror, um, it's not something that they can be proud of. The Chinese are also very face forward. Correct me if I'm wrong, right? The Chinese are very face forward. It's what you can brag about to your friends that's important. And it's very hard to brag about this person who writes horror because people don't understand. What is horror? People don't. We're still. When I started writing, uh, horror wasn't thought of as serious. Horror was thought of as um, a throwaway. Genre in general was thought of something throwaway. It's not something you were proud of. But uh, I had no choice but to write what I wrote, what I write. If I had a choice, I would be writing something different. So I kept writing, and
Why no choice? Are you just impelled? Like
I
what is it inside you that makes you write horror?
it's what comes out. I think it's how I process the world. Again, because of how I perceive the Chinese community's perception of me, like how I'm I was always excluded. I think that's how I process things. So even when I'm writing there's always some sort of horror and the supernatural that comes out in my writing. So I had no choice in that matter. It's what I mean. Um so so it's very hard. Like I'm very very thankful that I'm here now. I'm very very thankful that I was chosen by the Philippine government to represent to be part of the many representatives of the Philippines, um because at least the community values what I do, values what I offer. There's a community that resonates with my work. It got to the point where when I launched my first book, Waking the Dead, it was a big launch for that time. The only thing my mother said to me before I left for the launch was, why couldn't you have written a Christian book? Because again, it's not something you can be proud of to show your friends. Oh, my daughter wrote a horror novel, a horror anthology collection. But now that's changing. More people, and that's part of what I try to tell people. More people are beginning to understand that horror isn't just about monsters, isn't just about scaring. Horror is actually a very, very good vehicle for talking about what's happening in society. In fact, there are many scholarly works that talk about that specifically, about how the horror this horror that you see on screen on the page is usually a direct reaction to what's going on in society, and that's how I write my horror. It's not by choice. It's just what interests me. It's always about what's going on, how people are feeling. Horror is usually a direct reaction to being an outcast, an outsider. So maybe that's why. Thank you for asking that question. So maybe that's why I write horror as well, because it's a way for me to translate my feeling as an outsider in my community onto the page, so that other people who feel the same way, who maybe don't fit in the society, they have something to relate to. Yes.
Can I ask a follow-up question?
Yes.
Sorry, because I'm really interested in this panel. I ran all the way here. So this is a follow-up to Charleston, but also in relation to what you're saying. I felt like you were describing a community that was still fight or flight. The Chinese community, maybe they're inward looking and conservative, because it's a kind of survival thing because of what Charlson described. I mean, how terrible naman the representation, and then of course the history that you both talk about. I was researching that the other day, and nobody has really cottoned on to the fact that these massacres are the biggest in the history of Asia of Chinese people. So it's quite a major thing. So Charlson, thank you for the talk about the representation of Chinese people in history. And you're saying that it's changing, but at the same time, I feel like, especially with the attitudes of people in the Philippines, my own family, we have Chinese heritage, which I'm fascinated about, but they want to deny that we have Chinese heritage. Uh, how do you think will the future be? I mean, looking forward to the future with that history and that representation, it really is like a Jewish the way the Jews suffer anti-Semitism and are blamed for everything that happens in the world.
Well, to be fair, I mean the massacre. There have been bigger massacres in Southeast Asia. The Philippines is relatively benign, no? Not as and in recent times, wala na, no. Not unlike
Or say our 15th century and 16th.
yeah. So they're because we weren't that many to begin with. No? We never threatened the established the. No. But there were no now and then. They would be banned and then they would be asked to come back because the colony could not. Well, at least the elite could not survive without their Chinese barbers and all that. No? So it's also been a commodity. What's going to happen? And where they are not, they're flying. They're flying to Canada and buying up land. What they did before. But all Chinese do that, right? They even from the mainland. So right now, there's always been a big mestizo, or in Malaysia they call peranakan, di ba? Class, and then I think these days it's more because of recent events. Again, the question of identity suddenly is becoming more because they make you choose. Here you have to take a stand. So why should I take a stand? Now why? How about the Filipino Americans? Why don't they take a stand? Why don't they come back here and say, defend the country? Right? I'm not going anywhere. I'm here. So it's neither here nor there. I think because of the middle class, of course, the it's largely upper middle class is largely Chinese. A lot of it, the schools, Ika, Xavier, Ateneo, uh, and they are now in government. Uh, so I think it's a personal choice in the end.
Yeah.
There are those who go abroad. A lot of the past, a lot of my classmates, they would go to Canada, get a citizenship, and come back. Because they make money. To be honest, they make their money in the Manila. There's really nothing for them to do in Canada, unless you're a professional. Uh, so I can't say what the future is because my last book called The Arhat Sun tackles a bit of that, of the elites in China trying to use the Chinese elites in the Philippines for their own machinations. So I think things will have to play out. Hopefully, I think there's compared to other parts of Southeast Asia, there's tends to be a bit less tension. I don't know. It's partly because of religion, because we're all Catholics, right? That's been the way of sort of ease assimilation. Is just get baptized, right? Everyone gets baptized, and then you're okay up to a certain degree. So no one knows. No, if shit hits the fan, you don't know what will happen, right? But right now, it's holding on, and I think that's all we can try to keep things together.
I was going to say that your mother's comment on why don't you write Christian stories. Have you read the lives of saints? Some of those stories are horrific.
Actually, I wanted to say, have you read the Bible? Very horrific.
About mothers. Yeah, the first when my first book came out, Men of the East. So of course, yeah, first book I sort of wanted my mother to read. I read it. I don't know. I think she read it, but she wasn't commenting. And then one day she just said, "Well, I didn't think your childhood was that sad." Okay, so I learned my lesson. Never again impose your book on your relatives. Let them read if they want to, but they will always see themselves in the work, whether or not you meant it or not.
I think that happens even if you're not Chinese.
In my case, my mother is very, very proud of me now. But do you know why? Not because she's read my book, not because she thinks I'm a good writer. It's because other people who I think also have not read my book see that other people have been congratulating me. So they tell my mom, oh, your daughter's very good. So now she's proud of me because other people are proud of me. I love my mother, by the way.
So going back to the question on references, right? So you mentioned that in your work you reference Philippine mythology. Do you see yourself ever referencing Chinese horror characters or notions and myths?
Well, actually, I do. Well, this one, the excerpt I read from Fold Up Boy is my trying to find that. Now, I'm actually on that journey, but I'm going at it from a scholarly point of view because my question was, so it's very, very easy to find stories about Filipino folk monsters, folk creatures. And as a folklorist, as a casual folklorist, we know that when a group travels to another country, when they migrate, they take everything with them as much as possible: their food, their culture, their folklore. So my question was, why don't we have any Chinese monsters? So I set about asking people. I eventually a friend introduced me to his cousin who is a Taoist master. And the explanation was because the Chinese, at least where we come from, which is we come from Xiamen, which is in
Southern.
Fujian, the Fujian province. We don't exactly have creatures like folkloric creatures. What we do have is ancestor worship. So it's very, very personal. And then I'm also beginning to learn about the Taoist hierarchy, how very, very bureaucratic it is, and how when they migrate, they don't they worship their ancestors and they also worship the spirit of the land. So they don't take anything from China with them except their ancestors. When they get here, like, okay, who do we worship? You. They call them the landlord. You're in charge of this area. I will worship, like, I will venerate you. So it was very interesting to me. And I also asked, so my other question was, why are there no stories about Chinese ghosts in the community? The answer was, well, it's because you don't read Chinese. It's all in the Chinese newspapers. And may I tell a story about the ghosts in. So at first I thought there were no Chinese ghosts in the Philippines, but I heard the story again from this Taoist master about how he went to a province to officiate the funeral of this government official. And two Filipinos, like two of the employees came running down. They're like, sir, 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 we saw two ghosts, a tall one and a short one. And they didn't know who they were. They were like, to them, they were just random tall person, short person. To the Taoist master, it was like, oh, those are the Grim Reapers, the Chinese Grim Reapers. Uh, I forget what they're called. The black and white impermanence. So it shows that these people who saw the black and white impermanence weren't Chinese, but they came to take away the soul of this person of Chinese descent. So there is that. So I'm only discovering that now, and I think that's what's going to come about in the future.
So it's taking you there. And for Charleston, I queued into two things or 10,000 something and 10,000 sorrows in this book. And then another 10,000 noses, right? And so what's with 10,000?
Well, that's a Chinese expression for many, many, many. Yeah, 10,000. Iwan. Jiban is always the expression for multitude. Yeah.
I think we have time for one more question. Yes.
So I live in the UK, and there's a lot of like interest in publishing stories from other cultures, but the Chinese books are a little bit stuck because and this is children's publishing, because all of the titles of the Chinese books have moon in it. Moon, a characters named Luna, and then the British publishers tend to publish these books in Lunar New Year. So I think there's going to be a bit of a climb, a bit of a, can you respond to that? Like, we're trying to bring our stories to the world, but the world sees us in a certain format.
Go ahead.
Well, the moon has always been very poetic symbol for China, like because the great poet Li Bai, the stories that he was so drunk and he was what I read. No, he saw the moon and he reached for the moon and he drowned. But of course, that's a story. He actually died of cirrhosis, probably. Uh, and then even when I was a child, there was a Chinese writer in the Philippines. He was writing in, no, and then the story was that one day he was old, so he took a boat, he rowed out to sea and never seen again. Of course, I don't believe that, you know. No, who the hell will do that? But these are the stories, right? I don't know. It's okay. I think the moon is always there in China, well, even Japanese mythology representation. The moon is a big thing. It's the yin and it's a yin, the yin of the yang, and it's sexier because the yang is so the yin is always the shadow. It's erotic. It's the underworld. Yeah. It's the shadow life and all.
What if all the titles have moon in it? Who's going to tell the difference between all the different Asian writers? So maybe it's good your titles don't have moon in it.
Or
Horror. Oh, yeah. I love the Siki horror.
But I think it's important that we are trying to break from these stereotypes, right? And you are a prime example of that yourself, the two of you. And I think that being able to break from the stereotypes and show that in the Philippines, the Chinese community is so diverse. And maybe we should describe that a little bit if you don't mind, right before we close.
but may I answer Candy's question? My theory, my personal theory. So nothing my personal theory about this is if we want the easiest way to break the moon cycle. See what I did there? But it's the easiest but also the hardest because it relies on luck and timing. Would be through another form of medium. Say if there was a Chinese version of say something like K-pop Demon Hunters that took the world by storm, like something a Chinese story that took the world by storm that had nothing to do with the moon. That overnight will change what the publishers want in terms of okay, we don't need the moon anymore. Like we can, but of course that would mean it might get pigeonholed into whatever that movie or TV show it is. So um, that is my theory, and I think it's also it's also my theory on why the Chinese Filipinos are more accepted now. It's because number one, we have actors who are Chinese. We have Kim Chu, we have Xian Lao. So they see these Chinese faces on their TV screens and the movies. So that translates to them being more accepting of the community. So I think that can be a big factor.
Well, if you listen to the excerpt, actually, the grandmother steals the moon. I think that was my way of. I wanted to
Take it away.
yeah, take it away. Yeah, steals the moon, brings it with her. So that was my idea for the moon. Anyway, in the Philippines right now, well, we have a national artist who has just passed in visual art, Ang Kok. I was born in China, and his paintings has nothing to do with China, nothing Asian about it. He's a cubist. uh, Does a lot of Christian iconography. And Kok actually means save the nation. And I think he was born with another name and common name. So during the Second World War, he changed his name. Anti-Japanese period, ang Kok.
Yoko.
Uh, yeah,
Realize
that.
that.
So, yeah. So that's it.
Oh, thank you everyone for being here first. We'd like to thank Yvette Tan. Let's give her a hand. And Charlson Ong, not only for sharing but also reading to us. So wonderful that they read to us, really. Thank you very much everyone for being here.